Right? So they want to deregulate, get rid of those agencies which are regulatory. This is all based on, the third tier, fourth tier at the bottom. Everyone takes care of themselves. Then they have all these anti-government stances. And the way that those are legitimated or get done is through anti-tax movements and by talking about government being the problem, right? On the far right, you guys are really going to love this because who isn't into the notion of flexible labor, right? What comes to mind when you say flexible labor? And I'm thinking, well, maybe I could work from home, go to my office every now and then. I'm thinking about this flexibility, but it's not that at all. What it is the recognition that capitalism inherently has economic downturns. They have overproduction, all kinds of things happening, and they have economic downturns. What they want to do is establish the conditions in which the firms have full control over the terms and conditions of employment so that they are not subjected to any fixed costs during that downturn, right? Mm-hmm. What's a fixed cost? Those things that you have to pay. Who creates these things? Well, there's a lot on the production side. Labor is one, right? But it's particularly fixed when you have a labor contract. Right? A union contract says you've got to give these increases over time and so forth. It doesn't matter if there's an economic downturn, you have to do this, right? And so what they're trying to do is to minimize the impact, mitigate the impact of that economic downturn so that the firm can rebound or will do whatever it's going to do, but survive that economic downturn. And so you have then, as a result, anti-union principles, ideas. You have anti-tenure principles and ideas, right? So teachers should not be given tenure. Faculty should not be given tenure, right? I had, when I was in Colorado, I was head of the faculty on my campus, and I remember talking with the regents. We had this retired general, and we were having a conversation with him and said, we need tenure because of freedom, academic freedom. We need to be able to talk about things in society without any fear of repercussion by politicians, right? Mm-hmm. And he says, that's long been settled. Right? We don't need academic freedom anymore. That's a settled issue. Mm-hmm. Not under our society today, it's not. In fact, what they're doing in the academy today, the majority of faculty across the country are now what we call contingent or adjunct faculty. That is, they are part-time faculty who often do not have the resources to effectively teach, who do not have offices to meet with their students, and so forth. In California, they call them freeway flyers because they're teaching over here at Whittier College, then they go over here and teach at East LA, and then they go over here and teach in another place, and they're just running all over the place trying to make a living. And because they only work, if you will, part-time at one institution, none of them pays them benefits. Which is what you find today, right? A lot of institutions, firms, and organizations have now reduced the employment of their labor force to the point where they're just beneath that threshold where they don't have to pay fringe benefits, right? So this is what is going on. This is all done under the banner of free market fundamentalism. So what has it given us? Well, what is it, right? It's basically the revolt of the ruling class in capitalist society. They basically said this collectivism, all of these principles of public good and so forth, they're just undermining their capacity to get as rich as they want and so forth. And they've revolted. And they've used the power of their wealth, the power of the corporations, and the power of the state to transform the society from a social democratic order to a neoliberal order. So today you live in a neoliberal order which is governed by these principles. You know them because you hear them all the time, right? You hear freedom, you hear privatization, you hear efficiency, you hear innovation, all of that kind of stuff, but it isn't put together into a design of society in which you find yourself. And so many of us are trying to transform, attack racism or attack the problems that we see, thinking that we're still in the old order. But we're not. And so you have to think about it differently. There's a lot of criticism about Obama, but the one thing that I have to say about him is that he brought in a revolution of values. Because before him, we were hearing all of this nonsense, and those of us who spoke up against it were seen as the troublemakers, right? And we had to get in line, we had to be brought to heel. But he was able to bring it and mobilize the sentiments of those people who knew something was wrong but didn't quite know what it was or what it is, and was able to get elected on the basis of that. So that's the context in which you're in. Now, the question is, what's next? Where do we go from here? We know that neoliberalism is under assault today, right? What happened here in Flint has probably caused more people across this country to question what is going on. How could this have happened, right? And I tell you, in some of the publications back there, my perspective on how it happened. But where do we go from here? Well, what has neoliberalism given us? It has given us the greatest amount of inequality in our society since the Great Depression, since before the Great Depression, right? It has sent manufacturing abroad so that there are much fewer manufacturing jobs in this country. And yet every time we hear these politicians talk, they say, I'm going to engage in job creation. And I always hold my ear to see if I can help myself understand how they're going to do that, right? And none of them ever tell me how they're going to do that, because they haven't got a clue how they're going to do that. They're still manipulating the electorate, right? So what we have to do, there's a scholar by the name of Roberto Unger, a Harvard professor, a Brazilian philosopher, and so forth, and he says what we have to do is to democratize the economy. Right now we have an economy in which those who have get to hoard as much as possible, and those who have nothing get blamed for having nothing because it's their own fault, right? And since there are no institutional processes or structures, it must be their fault, because the market is free and open. Everyone has a fair chance, right? Which is what? Nonsense. There are structures. They have used the state to create those structures, and they know full well that it's not a level playing field, right? So Roberto Unger says we have to democratize the economy, and I've been grappling with that notion because he doesn't really go on to say what it is. But what I think it is to freeing up capital, preparing people to be able to utilize capital in the economy for production, profit making, and so forth, giving them a fair chance, and providing access to capital, right? There's no reason why these folks should be hoarding it all over here. I mean, like, how many billions do you really need? You're only going to live 75, 80 years. It's a very short time. You're not going to make good use of the $700 billion that you've got, right? And it isn't until you're 75 when you say, oh, I'm confronting my mortality, I'm going to do good things with my wealth, right? It's terrible. It's a terrible way to do it. So we have to democratize the economy. We have to make capital accessible so others can participate and have a fair chance of making a living, right? We have to preserve democracy. I don't know how many of you have noticed, but voter suppression is in vogue, right? Gerrymandering is in vogue. You can actually run and get the greatest number of votes and still lose the election. How does that work? Right? It works through gerrymandering. They have set up the rules to benefit one party over the other, and they win because of that. That's how you get, the Triple Crown, the House, the Senate, and the governorship, right? And voter suppression, I mean, how many different ways does the Supreme Court have to tell them that it's unconstitutional? You know, what I don't get is that they're told that it is unconstitutional to do this, and you still see these groups doing it someplace else, right? Have you noticed that when they set in motion a particular conservative legislative agenda, it happens across a lot of different states? Ever wonder how they can all be thinking alike at the same time?
Yeah, what's the name of that organization?
They have the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is the ALEC, which is the conservative organization established in Chicago in the early 1970s after the Powell memo was released. Well, actually made available. Look up the Powell memo online. Powell went on to become Supreme Court Justice, appointed, I think, by Nixon. But before he did that, in the late 1960s, he sent a 34-page memo. Can you believe that? Who writes a 34-page memo? In which he said that the free enterprise system was under attack, and he was under attack by radical faculty and radical students, and that something had to be done about it. And he then set an agenda saying, we've got to create think tanks, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And if you look back over the last 40 years, guess what? They implemented that to a T. Beautifully. I mean, you wish you had that kind of wealth and influence to be able to carry something like that out, right? So we've got to protect and preserve democracy and the democratic freedoms. If we don't, there's only going to be one or two ways by which the society can be transformed, right? And that's going to be through some form of violence or through some form of collective action that brings the whole society to a halt. And these things have happened in history all the time. I'm not advocating that. I'm telling you as a sociologist, this happens, revolutions happen, and they happen when there's economic problems in society, when large masses of people are disenfranchised. That's when it happens, right? And lastly, we have to preserve government for the people, right? Not government for corporations, not government for the wealthy, but government for the people, for everybody. Government is not the problem. The problem are the regimes that take over government and use the power of government against the people. That's the problem, right? I talked over the last 30 years, I've talked to so many people who tell me, well, the government is the problem. They have this anti-government perspective. And young people, we're now in the third generation of young people who have grown up with nothing but that view, right? They think that's normal, that government is the problem. And so they hold anti-government perspectives, even though they know not why, but they've been socialized to do that. So we must, make sure that government serves the people. Make sure that government addresses the issues of civil rights for all people, that it addresses the forms of racism that continue to exclude us from full participation in society, that provides for the public good, that provides for the common welfare. A change in values from social democratic order to a neoliberal order can be emphasized by a very simple example, and that is a college education. Under the social democratic order, we believed that the use of tax monies to subsidize the education of American kids was good because it lifted our youth and made us a more educated country, and that would benefit us all collectively, even if some of us didn't quite get the full message while we were in these courses, right? But as a whole, we would be better. Under the neoliberal order, college education is considered a private good. You're the one that benefits from it, so you pay for it. There's no reason to use taxes to subsidize your education, right? What does that do? Well, that basically keeps some people out, and those who can get loans, and now we've got all these financial companies who are flocking to just send us credit cards and loan opportunities and so forth. The kids now have the largest debt in this country, over $1 trillion, right? It's greater than the mortgage debt in this country. Can you imagine that? Right? And the quality of education is going down. Right? They're forcing us to do more and more research, moving more and more away from teaching, having these part-time faculty teach with minimum resources, and then talking about distance education as if that was like the best quality of education you can get, which it isn't. It's pathetic, particularly if you're working class or working poor. That is not a good way to get educated. You don't have any contact with your faculty member. You don't get to discuss things, and faculty are so busy they're not even responding to all the thousands of emails that now come through those things. So it just isn't working. So we must make sure that the government secures our civil liberties, that it secures our constitutional rights, that it provides for the safety and welfare of the citizens, and most importantly, that government pursues opportunities for the continued progress of its citizens. Do you feel that your government is pursuing opportunities for your betterment? Not at all, right? It isn't working that way. So, I want to end with that and just basically say that neoliberalism has used a very punitive model to get these things done through these mechanisms that I told you about, withholding funds from poor schools. Now we have, No Child Left Behind is gone, which punished low-income schools for not doing well, which we always knew that low socioeconomic status is the principal cause of poor performance, that it had nothing to do with some of the factors that they were emphasizing. Now we have Every Child Succeeds, which at least funnels money to low-performing schools rather than punishing them. We have now another punitive model, the anti-sanctuary movement that is it's embedded in the immigration processes and dynamics, where some cities really believe that immigration is a federal issue and not a local issue, and so they passed local ordinances that basically said our local police will not work with federal agents to conduct raids and deport people. And they declared themselves sanctuary cities, right? So now the legislatures, right-wing legislatures, are saying, okay, we'll pass legislation that basically says every lower jurisdiction that declares itself a sanctuary site will have state funds withdrawn from it or withheld from it, right?
Yes, true.
So it's a constant process of the big stick to drive you into submission. There are some new models that are emerging that use, the same sort of logic against the neoliberals. And this is happening particularly in California, where cities are rewarded for doing things rather than punished for them. But in the end, I want to say it's important, that you understand this context, this historical moment in which you live. Do not think that you live in a social democratic order. Do not think that the values of freedom and so forth that had a particular meaning in the social democratic order prevail today. They do not. So it's important that you stay informed about candidates for office, judge them in terms of what they have to say relative to these three principles. Do they believe that an individual should stand alone in society and take full control of their well-being? Do you believe that we need a government that is smaller, that we privatize government functions, that we deregulate the economy so those with wealth can do whatever they want, even if it means that future generations, black, white, brown, whatever, will bear the brunt of the negative effects of what they're leaving behind, right? And think of it in terms, judge them in accordance to what their beliefs are relative to flexible labor, right? Are they simply trying to create the conditions where the firms have full control in determining the terms and conditions of employment and that labor has no rights, and that there ought not to be any organizing efforts in the workplace to protect the rights of workers. Think about that. And vote in your own interest and not against them. I think the American electorate has been voting against their own interests now for almost 40 years. I leave you with that.